good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Austin. I'll be our moderator for the June Town Hall, which is also going to serve as our 2021 legislative interview. Before I get started, I want to give a thank you to all involved for setting up this event. It's always great when we can hear from our elected officials, because the most important thing for our government is to be honest, humble with us, and of course to serve the public. And this is exactly what this type of forum does and gives us an opportunity for. Let's do a quick show of hands on the KEMA bill. If you voted to pass the KEMA bill, would you please raise your hand? Thank you. You guys had great answers. Just want to make sure we're all understood, where we all stand on the issues. Let's move to taxes. So, kind of my bread and butter, we had two really big tax bills in this legislative session. We had SB 50, which was a hodgepodge of sorts of income tax bills, as well as a little bit of sales tax. And I particularly like this one because 4 years ago, when I was chief economist at the Kansas Department of Revenue, I testified calculating the effects of President Trump's 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act to both the House and Senate Tax Committee. And I remember saying, yes, Kansas families and businesses are going to see, this amount of money coming from President Trump's actions, but because of state law, there's going to be a sizable portion of money going to the state government. And I believe the intention for this act was for families and businesses to get 100% of these type of relief. So if it could be done to move that state money back to the hands of Kansans, I think that would follow with the intent. And of course, the legislature acted, and every year, I think for the past 3 years, they tried to get this bill passed to make sure they get that lost wallet of tax funds back to you. And every year, the Governor Kelly vetoed, except this year. So that's a pretty big package that we got out, and I'd love to hear your opinions on this, but let's also talk about property taxes. Property taxes was another critical issue that got resolved this year. So often we find that in local areas at their city or county level, and I live in Lawrence, so I most certainly know this, local officials would raise the value of your home, but keep that mill rate the same. And so your taxes would go up, and then you'd go to your local official and say, hey, my taxes would go up, and they would respond, oh, well, we didn't touch your mill rate, nothing really happened. That's a lie, right? Your taxes did rise. And so I remember I kicked off a campaign with an op-ed talking about how we need to lower that mill rate whenever we see our home values rise up in order to keep those taxes that we pay level. So we got both of those bills out. So if you can, relatively briefly, because I would love to get to value them both, tell us how you voted on those income tax bills and property tax bills and why. We'll start with Representative Johnson.
Of course, we wanted clarity. We want people to understand. I remember last year when we were campaigning, Lance was talking to me about how one taxing entity in his area on a library board, they set their mill level. Nobody knew about it. The mill level that they brought in affected everybody's taxes. It was sneaky, well, not sneaky. They weren't trying to hide it, or were they? Okay. So this was a method in which we could require these taxing entities to let us know what it is they're doing. Now, I'm going to say, after going to the County Commission working meeting here a couple of weeks ago, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because we put some challenges in to getting that done. But I need to know, because my home valuation, and that's based on comparative sales. And I can't believe my house is worth that, but maybe it is. So I'm selling my house. No, really, I sold my house this week. No, it's not in Wyandotte County, sorry. But yes, we supported that. I still think there is work to be done in the legislature in regards to how we value properties in a fair and safe manner. And I'm not sure what that is yet. I am still learning.
Well, I voted for both of them, obviously. Taxes was one of the things I ran on. Our taxes are completely out of control. I have 4 children. They're adults. I want them to stay in this area. I don't want them to have to move away because they can't afford to get a home because property taxes are too high, etc. So that was one of the things that I definitely was interested in. One of the other things that, all of us and everything, I'll explain this real quickly. If you throw an HB number at us and everything, we're not going to be able to tell you most likely what that bill was unless it was one of the big ones, because we heard 250, 300 of them while we were up there. So, but in one of the bills, one of the things that was very important in the taxes was that they, for people 65 and over, they were going to freeze their taxes for 2020 or 2021, whichever was the highest, or whichever was the lowest, I'm sorry, whichever was the lowest. And then it wouldn't go up from then on. That was one that I was very, very interested in, because I'm hearing from a lot of people, as their taxes keep going up and they're on a fixed income, that, it's got to stop somewhere. And this is one of those ways that can get done. And it has support. It was put into a bill, but I don't think it went through this year, but I do believe in everything that we'll get it through this next time. And, I will keep fighting and everything to try and bring our taxes down on whatever it is we can do it on, because we all need help right now.
Yeah, that's the number one issue that I ran on to begin with 3 years ago was taxes. I'm sure you all remember Debbie Deere down in the 40th, who just acted like a cheerleader in 2017 when the legislature overturned Governor Brownback's veto of the largest income tax increase in the Kansas history. So that's the reason I ran. It's still my number one priority. Lance talked about his kids having to move away because they can't afford to live here. Linda and I can't afford to live here. We keep raising our taxes. We're living on fixed incomes like many of you are, and I'm sorry, we just can't afford 10% increases in property taxes every year. There's just no way we can sustain that. So the property tax bill was very important. I think we can all agree it's not where it needs to be yet, but it's a start. We have 2 fine county commissioners here that have fought hard to reduce the mill levy to compensate for the high appraisals. They haven't been able to be totally successful in that, but I appreciate their help in trying to reduce those property taxes. The other one was the tax cuts, the Trump tax cuts that just never got back down to Kansas taxpayers. The governor wanted to keep all that extra money that she got from the federal government for herself and all of her little agenda. And so for 2 years, she kept that as in her bag of money. This year, we made a whole lot of progress on that because we've got a whole new legislature full of conservatives that are ready to return some of the taxpayers' money back to them. And so it's been a good year for both the taxes being returned to the taxpayers and also some work on the property taxes. But like I said, there's still work that has to be done there, and we're going to be working very carefully with the county commissioners trying to come up with a way to make this work. Thank you.
Oh, I voted for both of them enthusiastically. Representative Johnson talked about the study session that we had a couple weeks ago with the county commissioners, and it was a great conversation. And I echo what Representative French said. Commissioner Smith and Commissioner Stephen are 2 tax hawks in our county commission. I mean, they're the voice of fiscal conservatism in our county commission, but not everybody up there is as enthusiastic about dropping the mill levy as they are. And so there was a bit of a heated conversation. And, in addition to the folks up here on the stage now, our state senator decided to come, Democrat Jeff Pittman. And it was really interesting. You know, the meeting wasn't televised, and I wish it was, because if it had been televised, it really kind of peeled the veneer off of where conservatives stand versus where Democrats stand on taxes. You know, he got up there and wailed and moaned about how terrible the property tax bill is. Awful. There are so many terrible things in this property tax bill. And then somebody pointed out, Jeff, didn't you vote for it? Well, yeah, I voted for it, but you know, it's awful. It's awful. And the reason he voted for it is because he wants to get reelected, and he was hearing from all his constituents that it's out of control. The valuations keep going up, and the mill levies don't drop, and so the net effect is that our property taxes are going up every year. And it's, you know, I just told you on the Kansas Emergency Management Act that it's my belief that every decision that the government makes should be made by elected officials who are answerable to the people that they represent. And for years, the decision has been made by an assessor, a property value assessor, who's raising all our taxes. And so this reinserts the voice of the people through their elected county commissioners, city commissioners, school board members, because now the school board's under the same rule. It reinserts those voices, our voices, through those elected officials back into the process of determining our taxes. And if we don't like the decision they make, they'll be accountable to the voters at the ballot box, and we can change captains of the ship if we don't like the way they're steering it. But one other thing that he said on the way out, Senator Pittman said on the way out, that I wanted to take just a second with, was as he was on his way out, he said, "Yeah, and then they cut taxes for all those multinational corporations. So now we're going to have a big budget problem." I don't know a lot of multinational corporations that are taking the individual standard deduction on their income taxes. I don't know what planet this guy comes from. This tax cut is about returning the Trump tax cuts, the federal tax cuts, back to you. Because of a quirk in our tax law, if you itemize federal, you had to itemize state. And if you took the standard deduction federal, you had to take the standard deduction state. And when the federal standard deduction went up, it basically turned into a backdoor tax hike for you on your state taxes. All we did was allow families and those small businesses that are sole proprietorships and those small businesses that are filing to decouple them so they could get those tax cuts back. And you know, that's all about putting money in your pockets, but also putting money back in the pockets of the small business owners so they can rehire all these people that Governor Kelly put out of work with their shutdown. And frankly, I think that's why they didn't want it.
Thank you very much.
Why don't you just add something?
Sure, please.
What Pat just said there on the deductions, something that a lot of people don't know is that you can do your medical deductions on that. That's something that a lot of people don't realize. And you can itemize your medical deductions. Those of you that have things that you have to deal with and everything on a monthly basis, those things can be deducted. And you can put those on your taxes and stuff now. And I think it's going to be a great thing for a lot of people that are having to deal with the huge medical costs that people are having to deal with too.
Thank you. For a matter of transparency, let's talk about that income tax bill, SB 50. If you voted for it, please raise your hand. Okay? On the property tax bill, SB 13, if you voted for it, please raise your hand. Can we give them a round of applause for that? All right, let's talk about value then vote. It's a constitutional amendment that will be on the ballot, I believe, next year, August. And what it does is it's part of the checks and balances, against our activist judges. Somehow, some way along the line, Kansas Supreme Court judges believe that the Constitution gave a right to an abortion, which is completely ludicrous. So we're going to take this to the people and make sure that that standard was nowhere in the Constitution for either funding it or having a right to an abortion in any way, shape, or form. So the threshold to get that through both chambers was a little bit, I believe it's 2/3, is that correct? 2/3, and then of course it will go to the people for a vote. And even though it's occurring in August, this of course is available for all Kansans, or excuse me, all registered voters to weigh in on. So let's go with Representative Proctor. Please explain your vote on value of them both and why.
I promised when I was running that I was going to vote for this thing, and I think it's no surprise that I voted for it. I could not be more passionately pro-life. The forces, the pro-abortion industry forces are already flooding our state with money. They are so desperate to stop this. I don't know if you saw in the news the other day, abortions have gone up 9% in this state since this Supreme Court decision basically removed our ability to regulate the abortion industry. 52% of the abortions that are conducted in the state of Kansas right now are from pregnant mothers that are out of state, that come into the state of Kansas to have abortions, because all of those common sense regulations that we put on the books are being stricken down. The other day, Kansas court just struck down the ban on the barbaric practice of dismemberment abortion. You now have a dismemberment abortion in the state of Kansas. And it just breaks my heart. I mean, it's horrific. But the pro-abortion forces, they're going to tell you this will ban abortion. This will take us back to clothes hangers and back alleys. Well, in April 2019, abortion was legal, and all it's doing is taking us back to April of 2019, before the Kansas Supreme Court stole your rights, yours and mine, our rights to regulate the abortion industry, just like we regulate. We just passed legislation to regulate the ATV industry and we pass regulations every day for industries to make sure that Kansans are safe. Why is the abortion industry suddenly some protected industry that has and every person has an inalienable right to an abortion? So absolutely, I voted for this, and I'm going to be out. I know a lot of people in this room are going to be out with me over the next year, knocking doors and getting our neighbors to vote to pass the value vote.
Yeah, I'm the only one on the stage that's actually voted for it twice. I voted for it last year. Unfortunately, at that time, we were 4 votes short, so it didn't pass last year. Again, like I said, we've got a more conservative legislature this year, and we were able to pass it and get it back on the ballot, which is, like I said, it's a primary objective of the Republican leadership. My only concern with this bill this year was that they put off putting it on the ballot till next year. To me, shouldn't be pushing off this vote that long. It's just going to give the Democrats more time to raise more money to fight it. And the fact that if we'd have had it this year in August, instead of next year, we would have saved about 7,000 babies' lives.
That's right.
So, not happy with that, but we have an amendment coming up. We need to get behind it. Without that amendment, the Supreme Court decision in 2019 is going to stand, and abortion will become a commonplace in Kansas again, and we'll have all these other states sending their abortion people to Kansas. So we've got to get this passed. It's just that simple. We got to get out. We got to get people to understand the importance of this, to put it back in the hands of their representatives and not a bunch of unelected judges. So, help us get out and do that next year. Thank you.
Well, absolutely, I voted for the value them both. The ridiculousness of it when it happened just blew my mind. I mean, where they heard that. I mean, if they can make up that out of what they're saying it came from life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it almost says the opposite, doesn't it? So, the ridiculousness of it is just beyond me. So it's something that we absolutely have to change. I agree with David. Letting the judges make these decisions, is a bad thing. On that, something that I can see coming up with the judges is how we choose our judges here in the state of Kansas. That's got to be changed. It's got to be changed. My wife and I had talked about, putting out something so that when people go to the voting booth, they actually know some of the things that these judges have voted for. Because you go in there and you don't have any idea. You think, should I retain this judge? Should I not retain this judge? And, it's amazing to me that they get retained at all, because I have voted against, I think, all of them since I started voting. I've never liked a judge that I know of. So, anyway. Go ahead.
I tell you, he's a heck of a roommate up there in Topeka. The day he was going to throw out a little paper airplane down, because we had to go sit in the balcony, folks, because of COVID. Thank you, Governor. We had to go sit up there, and they put me and Lance way at the back, and that's like putting two cats and jammer kids back there playing. I swear I had to literally grab it out of his hands. He was getting ready to... Okay. A year ago, when Willie Dove asked me to run, the first question and the only question he asked me was value them both. And that was important to me. When I got to Topeka as a freshman, I don't think I understood what was accomplished in 2 weeks. Because I'm new. We're going to do it. We got the votes. We did everything we needed to do. And the pastor, the chaplain in Topeka, came over and sat down with me in my office that next morning. And he said, Tim, you guys made history today. Well, I don't understand, Dave. He said, we have worked on this forever. And what we did in the legislature was so awesome. And it didn't hit me for a while. A day later, I did get to go talk with our Speaker of the House, Ron Reichman. He's a man of faith. And literally, after this vote, shed tears because he felt like we had finally achieved that most important goal. And so for people that have battled, I thank you. But now I see the battle is still ahead of us to get that amendment passed. With that was another bill that got passed this year. It's about life. It was called Adrian's Law, which requires law enforcement and or Children and Family Services to check on those children that are reported to be at risk. And it was about a young child in Wyandotte County that was murdered by his parents. It's a horrendous story. And it had been on there, and we brought that back out of Children and Family Services, Children and Seniors Committee, and I wasn't sure it was going to make it through, but on the conference committee, we got it. Now, it's about life, not losing one more child, right? And so I asked some of the Democrats, what's the difference? One more child who is abused and dies, or those that are killed in the womb? Some of them are going to have to answer that question, and I want to make sure they have to answer it a year from now. Thank you.
Hey, Michael. Real quick before we leave this topic, Representative French and Representative Johnson both kind of highlight something that I think is really important that I don't want us to brush over, and that's, 2 years ago, this thing failed by 4 votes. And a lot of folks, like the folks in this room, got out there, knocked on doors, put out yard signs, picked up yard signs, put out yard signs again, did all that hard work to bring back a more conservative legislature that could get value in the vote done. And so that didn't, the final blow was struck in that first 2 weeks of the legislature, but it was really a year-long campaign that got us to that moment. And it just highlights how, the elections have consequences. You never know when a governor's going to be sitting in the chair and a pandemic's going to happen and she's going to become an empress. You never know when you have a city commission, sitting in our city commission room that just unilaterally decides to make us all wear masks after the county opts out of it. These elections, the campaigns that get the leaders in place to make the right decision at the right time, to reflect the Lord's will. That's where the fight happens, not when we push the button at the end of that battle.
Thank you very much. This might be pretty obvious, but if you voted for value them both, please raise your hand. Thank you very much. This is a great time if we have any questions from the audience.
Hello. First of all, I want to say you guys are the most conservative group of legislators in Leavenworth County in my lifetime's ever sent up there. I think you deserve a round of applause. One issue that I'm concerned about, the legislation that came through dealing with, and part of the legislation says that the county commissioners will decide if we're going to have dispensaries on the marijuana issue. And I don't have a problem personally if a medical doctor decides that THC is a better treatment. But I do have a problem with passing a piece of legislation that was modeled by the marijuana industry. They wrote it, they presented it, and every state that has gone from medicinal to recreational that started out with this exact same regime of legislation, because it's not going to be distributed at pharmacies. They're going to ask the county commissioners to establish dispensaries, and there's not going to be prescriptions. It's going to be some kind of a note. So if I'm feeling depressed today, I can just go down and get my marijuana. So I want to know, how are we going to, if that passes, how are you going to protect kids? How are you going to protect our families? And what about the culture that it creates having these dispensaries? I'll tell you one thing, I will never vote for a marijuana dispensary.
And Commissioner Stephen, I appreciate you asking this question, because I took a lot of grief on my vote, because this is, not everybody in my district is as conservative as the folks in this room. And so I appreciate you giving me the chance to talk to this. I have the very deepest compassion for the folks that have legitimate, real medical conditions that could be helped. There are the 7-year-old with the 20 seizures a day that could have that alleviated somewhat by THC, or the cancer patient that's literally starving to death because it can't hold down food. I have a lot of compassion for those folks, and that's why when there was an amendment offered to the bill that we actually heard that would have just done that, just given those folks the ability to have and use this drug to alleviate their pain and their suffering, I'm okay with that. Frankly, I am okay with that. What I'm not okay with is a dispensary on every corner and grow houses in our neighborhoods. And that's exactly what this bill was going to do. And so I voted for that amendment. And there was another amendment I voted for too that would have taken away the dispensaries and made a pharmacist in a pharmacy fill the prescription for the drug. I voted for that too. I almost could have lived with that, but I still would have wanted the stuff grown on a farm and not in grow houses in our neighborhood. But I voted for that. But I am not going to vote for the bill that we were presented with, which is, in my opinion, a pathway to recreational marijuana, just like they did in Colorado, just like they're doing right now in Oklahoma. Has anybody been to Colorado? Anybody in here been to Colorado? You know, I went there for training before I retired from the Army, and I'd heard how wonderful Colorado Springs was. And when I got there, you know, even in the nice neighborhoods, panhandlers everywhere, you know, there was a shipping container behind my hotel full of drug addicts, heroin addicts. And I went to the front desk at the hotel. I'm like, what the heck's going on here? I always heard how wonderful Colorado Springs was. And the lady at the desk told me, you know, it was before we legalized marijuana. And now we've got all these additional problems. The industry doesn't want to hear about that. They just want to make money. You know, and it's all cash business, so they can drive it around in big trucks full of cash, and we ain't ever going to see the tax dollars for it. But that's where I'm at on it, and I appreciate you giving me the chance to explain my vote.
One of the biggest disappointments I've had in the legislature was the vote we took the last day of the session on this medical marijuana bill. I do not know why the leadership brought it up. It passed. Unbelievably, it passed the House. Thank God the Senate didn't take it up, but it did pass the House, which pretty much tells you where this is going. I'm pretty much known as Mr. Anti-Marijuana in the House. I fight it every single chance I get, and I'll continue to fight it as long as I can. So, because I know what's going to happen. We all know where we've seen people that have been hooked on this drug. It is a gateway to even harder stuff. The medical part, I don't know if it's realistic or not. We get a lot of the Democrats pulling the emotional strings and telling us these sad stories. But I want to know for sure that medical marijuana is the only way you can solve a health problem. If there's another legal way of doing it, we ought to do it. So I'm still not convinced on medical marijuana, but I do know if we open that door, I know where we're going to end up.
Okay, this is where the division comes in, right here. Okay? About 4 to 6 years ago, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And I watched him die over a period of about a year and a half. And the things that they gave him and everything to control his pain, stuff like oxycodone, heroin in the form of morphine and things like this. These are better than cannabis. That's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And in our bill, it says that it has to be prescribed by a doctor. Every dispensary would have had to have a pharmacist. All these things were thought out. Because we'd seen what had happened in Colorado. We had seen what had happened in some of the other locations where this had happened. And when we talk about grow houses, the restrictions that are being placed in order for somebody to grow, everything, who should we turn around and say is causing that problem? How about city commission, county commission? They're allowing it to be grown there. They have to give access for the people to grow this. It's still illegal. You can't turn around and just grow it in your front yard. I am not for recreational marijuana. I don't want to see it. But medical marijuana is not the same thing. There are 5 drugs right now in the state of Kansas that have cannabis in them. And if you look them up, just like what I've been going through, I found out that I have diabetes. Well, they tell you that it says it doesn't have sugar in it, but it has fructose, sucrose, all these different names and everything that they have for the different things that are in these things. Many of you have been taking cannabis for years and not know it because of what it's called and the THC that's in it. One of the drugs has been in the state of Kansas for 23 years. And people have been taking it so that they can sleep, for anxiety, things like that. I think we've all had anxiety. So I have trouble sleeping all the time. So, but the way this was set up, everything, was so that people don't have to turn around and move out of the state of Kansas to get something to make their children feel better or stop their seizures or stop their pain. It was not designed and everything for somebody to turn around and go outside and smoke a doobie on the front porch. That's not what it was for. It was medical marijuana, not recreational marijuana.
This was a very challenging issue, and I will tell you, I approached it from the scientific standpoint. I met with several doctors, talked to the doctors. I asked them about things. I, in fact, sat next to the adjunct physician who serves on that committee and had many lengthy decisions about medicinal purposes. And in those circumstances, what I was hearing, when prescribed like other controlled substances, that means with a prescription from a doctor and administered by a pharmacist, it's no different than other controlled drugs. And then when I checked with a couple family members, I realized one of my own family members, not close, but is given some, for some issues with PTSD, and it helps. And Lance and I had talked about some of these issues from a medical standpoint. I clearly believe that it has to be administered by pharmacists. And I, in fact, talked with my local pharmacist on the phone from the floor when the amendment came up. But we didn't have much time to battle for it. I am sorry that it came up that last day. It was hurried up. Would you agree, gentlemen? I wasn't prepared for it that day. I kept thinking, let's talk about it a little more. But it was there. I did vote for it, and based on medicinal purposes. Now, I want you to know, I spent 31 years in the criminal justice field. I received a very high honor for my anti-drug work from the Bush administration and going out to school kids in Wyandotte County. So I know what drugs do. It's a dead-end road. But I want us to approach this scientifically and to make sure that we keep it from becoming what I just saw in Oklahoma as I drove through last week, dispensaries on every street corner. I think Oklahoma's going to be sorry for this. But it is a challenge, and I welcome an opportunity to discuss it with anyone because I want to get this right when it comes up next year.
We'll take one more question. Oh gosh, a lot of takers. I believe, let's do Connie.
Okay, my question has to deal with education. Since COVID, schools have been closed down. Some schools reopened last fall, some didn't. But the ones that are going to be hurt are our children, because I met with two teachers. They taught two different districts, one in Lawrence and the other one in Topeka. They're going to pass these kids this year. They're not going to hold any of them back. And they were telling me these kids are 2 years behind. They're not just the 1 year, but they're almost 2 years behind. What will that do to our education system here in Kansas that we're supposed to be so proud of if we're going to graduate kids that are not prepared to move on and be ready for a job or even college?
Thank you for your question. If we can, for the interest of time, let's try to answer briefly. And Representative Johnson, can you please start?
Okay. I clearly know what was happening. I taught through December 21st. Took a Christmas break and then I went to the legislature. I will never, ever be involved in Zoom, remote learning teaching again. It was worse. I am not upset with what they did because they were following guidelines and administrative directives. They had to do things. But in committee, in the education committee, we want them to know, and we enacted in some of our legislation requirements to assess them and find out where we are. And I've also heard, and I would estimate, because as soon as we were done, I started going out and substitute teaching again. No, I'm not the one that got in trouble. I just want to make that very clear. Both in public and parochial schools. It's amazing to me in the private parochial schools, both Lutheran and Catholic, they're on task. They're right there. Didn't miss a beat. And then there are other districts, and I'm not talking necessarily Base or Linwood. We'll just go a little bit east over the line. They're at least a year and a half behind because they weren't even there. Nobody followed up. And what are we going to do? I think it's in the hands of teachers. The teachers are going to be the difference, and we've got to support it.
That's tough and everything because, in my opinion, so many of our kids were already behind and not college ready when they were ready to graduate. I mean, we've been throwing money at the school systems for years and years now, and that's one of the issues we've had to deal with. They claim that more money will turn around and generate a child and everything that is more college ready and ready for life. And we've obviously proved that it's not true because we've done it every year, and it has not gotten better. Not gotten better. So, you know, Connie, them being, I'm not at all surprised that this is happening. And I don't envy the teachers. We have a lot of teachers in here, and it was hard on them. It was hard on them. I feel for them. I wouldn't want to do the Zoom thing either. We dealt with that up there on a consistent basis, and things broke down, didn't work, and the internet quit, and everything else. And then you have to think that you're trying to deal with kids on that. So, and you know, one of the things that happened and everything, and this isn't the teacher's fault, this is sometimes the administrator, sometimes it was the governor, sometimes it was the way COVID fell, and everything, is that they went back to school and then immediately 2 weeks later had to go back to teaching online again. And that's horrible for the teachers to have to deal with. So, you know, do we leave it up to the teachers and everything? I don't know who else can do it. I mean, you know, we have some of the best teachers and everything around, but I don't know how we catch that up, Connie. It's a horrible situation that I don't think you can get that time back. So,
Yeah, I think the pandemic only made a bad situation a whole lot worse. We had a problem with public education for many, many years now, and that's been my big problem with throwing more money. You know that 62% of our budget goes to education, which if you're looking for money to try to go somewhere else, you got to go find money in education, because that's where the money is in our budget. It all boiled down to, I was talking to the warden at Lansing Correctional Facility. He told me he'd been a superintendent in a school here in Kansas. He said he got out of the business because he said he couldn't stand on the graduation stage handing out diplomas to seniors that he knew were not ready and not got the education they needed to go out into the world. So this problem is not just a pandemic problem, but it has made it a whole lot worse. If we don't make some major corrections real quick, we're going to lose a lot of kids in Kansas. And it's really sad.
Connie, I'd like to get back to kind of your original topic, which is the school closures and the decisions that were made during the pandemic. You know, in Kansas, a lot of folks don't know this, but in Kansas we have an elected state board of education. So there's kind of a separation of powers on what the legislature can do budgetarily with the education versus the policies in the schools. And I would say, you know, I mean, I don't agree with them 100% of the time, but in the case of COVID, and in a lot of cases, the State Board of Education does what I would hope they'd do, which is devolve it to our local school boards, and like our local school boards make decisions. And I'll tell you, if you just look across Kansas at what our different school boards did, it tells you just how important those folks are that are in the seats. You know, why we had to vote on a bill to make Wyandotte schools go back to school. They were still out in like March, you know. And that's a reflection of local school board, the decisions we made, you know. But you know, we got some great school board members here in the room, Mike Powell and Alyssa Murphy, who you know, stood up and said we want our kids back in school when the superintendent was trying to close them. That's what it takes, is putting people in our local school boards who will be our voice, will ask tough questions of those superintendents. You know, a superintendent, he's got an educational doctorate or a PhD or something. We call him Dr. Rowe. He, you know, I mean, it's intimidating. He's been an educator for years, you know, and if you don't send the right person, they're not going to stand and ask the tough questions. They're just going to vote road with that guy. You know, whatever superintendent, whatever school board. You know, we got some great candidates here in the room that are running for school boards in Lansing and Leavenworth, and ask them the tough questions and make sure they stand where you stand. But then once they answer the questions and you're convinced that they're going to represent your views on the school board, you got to get out there and work for them and get them elected, because those municipal elections are so low turnout that, you know, that the person that can mobilize the most volunteers and the person that can get the most signs out and get the most doors knocked, they're going to win. I mean, because this ain't a big, huge, you know, swing election. You get a turnout of like 1,700 people, 1,500 people. So we got to get out. You know, when you find that candidate for the school board that you like, get out and support them and get them elected, where your kids will be a victim of our inattention to municipal elections.
Let's give a round of applause for our legislators. Thank you so much. Apparently you already see it. Thank you, everybody. This was a great evening. Oh my goodness, what a gorgeous day, and I loved the facts that we heard on this beautiful night from our lovely legislators. For those that don't know me, yes, of course, I'm Michael Austin, and if there's one thing I would love for you to take from this evening, it's that I'm not a politician. Nothing negative against the fine gentlemen that were up here this evening, but I'm actually an economist. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean I can tell you what the price of lumber is going to go in the next month? Or can I tell you how the stock market's going to perform? No. And in fact, let me tell you this. There's a reason why God created economists, and it's to make weather forecasters look good. As an economist, I don't guess the future. I deal in facts. And when I look at the history of our country, one fact stands out as clear as broad daylight to me. In places where there's more freedom, individuals, families, businesses, they make decisions that, you know, work the best for them and their loved ones. And in places where there's personal responsibility, places where people are trusted to do the right thing, guess what? They usually do the right thing. And there's no better example than the great Lindo family. Have you guys heard of the Lindo family at all? No? Okay, let me tell you, it's a great story. So, more than 100 years ago, oh, excuse me, sir. Would you mind one moment? More than 100 years ago, a young man by the name of Joseph Lindo left his home country of Cuba and went to another island, Trinidad and Tobago. There he met and married a woman named Essie. Now, these two were a bit of an odd couple. For example, Joseph had a natural knack. He could see the opportunities that were in front of him. He was able to seize those opportunities, and through his just tenacity, he was able to find success. Essie, his wife, on the other hand, was more of a traditionalist. She had a fierce devotion to family and strongly believed in instilling principles that would last for generations and generations. What they had in common was a belief that, the key to their flourishing, whatever their respects was, it was through freedom and self-sufficiency. So, as a budding family, they got themselves up and they moved to Panama. Joseph, for example, worked construction on the Panama Canal, earning silver for his work. His wife, Essie, turned the home into a grocery store and a laundry service, where most of her clients were the local police. See, she was even backing the blue, even 100 years ago. From these actions, they were able to save enough money to send their oldest child to school. And they taught their family the value of what? An entrepreneurial mindset, a love of family, and knowing that education, as Connie said, is the key to reaching greater heights. And these principles were repeated generation after generation. For example, Essie's granddaughter was given money from the family to go to England to get a nursing degree. Then she left for America for more opportunities. Now in America, I think this family has, my goodness, they have doctors, they have lawyers, they have educators, they have linguists. They're very successful. And in fact, 3 generations later, a descendant of the Lindo family was willing to do whatever it took to leave the high taxes, burdensome rules, and stifling socialist environment of New York City. In fact, she was willing to sell everything that she owned, except the clothes in her closets and the closets of her families, just so that she could leave to Kansas. This is my mother. Joseph and Essie are my great-great-grandparents. And in my blood lies a history, right, that used freedom and a love of family to overcome any obstacles, any opposition, all to reach the stars. And in my mind lies the fact that no other country in this world promotes the upward mobility of its citizens than the United States of America. That's a fact. It's why President Reagan called for government to show restraint, right, and have the utmost respect for our tax dollars. Yet here in recent years in Kansas, as we most certainly noticed today, government has grown at the expense of families and businesses. Kansas, unfortunately, has a history of bad fiscal management. Yes, we cut taxes in 2012 and 2013, but we had to raise them again. Why? Because we weren't willing to cut wasteful spending. Then, in the past 3 years, under the Kelly Rogers administration, they have turned government into a welfare distributor, picking winners and losers, encouraging people to stay home instead of working, and keeping the Kansas economy from reaching its potential. And don't worry, we'll talk about government overreach under COVID. That's also a fact. But it's also why I'm a strong believer in the principles behind the Constitution. A strong believer that people have inalienable rights, and that if you give any one person or governmental body enough power to manipulate the public or to redistribute resources, you'll end with the destruction of our society. That's why I've been the foremost researcher, as you've seen today, behind freedom-oriented and family-focused Kansas policy in nearly a decade. As chief economist to 2 Republican Kansas governors, my focus was always on giving Kansans more opportunities to succeed. I estimated, I can't tell you, countless tax relief packages because that money belongs to you, not the government. So when legislators, yes, not the governor. And when legislators who preached conservative values turned around and said cutting wasteful spending can't be done. As an example, I wrote a Kansas state budget that saved $1 billion of taxpayer money just to prove tax relief is always feasible. I was also the first to vocally push back on the Kelly Rogers COVID lockdown and mandates. Remember when her and her secretary misled the public on the effectiveness of mask mandates? You guys remember, we caught them in that lie. I caught them in that lie. And we drew national attention to their attempt to manipulate the public. So I say this all the time. If you haven't guessed it by now, I support a radical, very radical policy I like to call keeping more of what you earn. Very radical. I support giving Kansans the tools to govern their own lives. I've spent my career educating and fighting for conservative principles, and it is far past time for state government to do the same. It's time for us to step up and make sure that we protect the freedom that makes those opportunities possible. So today, if you can't tell, I am announcing I am running for Kansas State Treasurer because I believe now is the time to take a stand and demand that our money respected and our freedoms returned to us. You know me, I already have a plan. My campaign policy will focus on 3 main points. The first, expanding educational freedoms to all Kansans. Second, expanding financial freedom to future generations of Kansans. And last but not least, empowering Kansans by limiting government. Because first, I'm so glad you like it. Because first, you don't have freedom when Laura Kelly or some self-anointed local school board member closes your school, pushes wokeness and grievance culture, and then leaves families with no way out. Connie said it well. Research shows, even though schools are open today, research shows that because of distance learning, our children have retained about 70% of reading and 50% of math compared to in-person instruction. Think about that. Our children have learned only half as much in math, because in Kansas, the great equalizer shut its doors. We need to fix that. So I intend to give families the flexibility to set their kids up for a lifetime of success, providing the best education that suits each child's individual and unique needs. I'll expand access to tax-advantaged savings accounts, and I'll work with the legislature, our fine gentleman up here earlier today, to ensure that your tax dollars follow the child, not the system. If schools want to place draconian rules like they did last year or teach activism instead of academics like they're doing now, Kansas families should have the resources and the freedom to leave. Second, you don't have freedom when you call for the government to give you free health care, free tuition, free stuff. A friend told me those calls are a hallmark of a socialist future, creating a culture of debt and diverting them from a path to prosperity. Our young generation must know the dignity in work and the God-given joy that comes with it. So I'll work with banks and financial institutions to introduce financial literacy courses for our young children. And you know what? Maybe some politicians can take it too. That is how we create a free market future instead of a socialist one. So we should encourage young Kansans to examine their work and find the joy in knowing that they can bear their own load, their own weight, and not be a burden on others. Last but not least, you don't have freedom when politicians design and approve the largest tax increase in state history instead of making government effective and efficient. I wrote a state budget showing government can save taxpayers $1 billion. I provided examples about how state agencies can recognize when programs are failing. As state treasurer, an office that is directly accountable to you, I will do what I've always done, be your advocate. And so working with me, we can change the focus in Kansas government. We can put taxpayers first. If the past few years have shown us anything, it's that giving more power and control to the government has not made us better off. We've heard bureaucrats go from 15 days to slow the spread to follow the science to, you know what, I'm just going to control nearly every aspect of your lives, right? I want to highlight the other side of that equation. Thomas Sowell, who's my inspiration to get into economics, he famously said, freedom has cost too much blood and agony to be relinquished at the cheap price of rhetoric. In other words, we cannot allow losing the very freedoms that made America so great in the first place. For this reason, I am sacrificing my resources, my livelihood, frankly, my peace of mind, so that I can remain free, just like my ancestors before me. So I am Michael Austin, Republican and conservative for Kansas State Treasurer. I'm an economist, I'm a fiscal watchdog, I'm a proven champion of freedom, but most importantly, I'm a dad. I'm a husband, and I want to see Kansas succeed. But to do that, I need your help. Let's send a message to the Kelly Rogers administration that you are the experts in your own lives, that you know what is valuable and what is not. That is my call to action. I'm asking for your support in this race. I'm asking for your vote when the time comes. I'm asking for your financial support to help get me across the finish line. Thank you, and thank you so much for coming out on this gorgeous day. If you're interested in supporting the campaign, please see Tony in the back table, or you can visit our website, austinforkansas.com. There, you'll find that together we can bring honesty and responsibility to Topeka, we can improve the future of our kids, and we can bring freedom back to the Free State. Thank you very much.